The stadium lights glowed like a second sky. 20,000–5,000 people filled the open-air arena, their voices blending into a living ocean of anticipation. Programs fluttered. Vendors moved through the aisles. Couples leaned close. Fathers hoisted children onto shoulders. The stage shimmered under a canopy of gold and blue, the band already seated, instruments catching the light like scattered stars, and then the orchestra began. A hush rolled through the crowd. Not forced, not announced, just felt. The kind of silence that only happens when thousands of people lean forward at the same time. From the side of the stage, Dean Martin stepped into the light, not hurried, not dramatic, just steady. The applause rose like thunder. Dean paused, as he always did, letting the sound pass through him instead of over him. His face held that familiar, easy smile, but behind it was something else tonight, something quieter, more inward. The kind of look that comes from years of standing in front of crowds. While privately carrying moments no one else ever sees, he lifted a hand in thanks, nodded once to the orchestra. The first notes of the evening drifted out into the warm air. Music filled the arena, not loud, not flashy, warm, human, alive. His voice followed smooth, effortless, wrapping around every word, as if each lyric had been waiting its whole life to be spoken aloud. People closed their eyes. Some swayed. Some whispered the lines to themselves. For many in that crowd, his songs weren't entertainment. They were memory. They were first dances, long drives, kitchen radios, nights when the world felt too heavy and his voice made it lighter. The concert unfolded beautifully, song after song. Laughter between verses. Gentle stories. Easy charm. He teased the band. He teased the crowd. He pointed out couples dancing in the aisles. He made the massive stadium feel like a living room. And then, somewhere between applause and the opening chords of the next number, Dean felt it. A hesitation. Not from the band. Not from the crowd. From himself. A strange pressure in the chest. The kind performers learn not to panic over. The kind you breathe through, smile through, sing through. But this wasn't physical. It was emotional. He let the verse flow, but his eyes drifted, scanning the sea of faces the way he always did, out of habit, out of gratitude, out of curiosity. And that's when he saw the boy. He was near the front, not standing, not clapping, sitting, small, too still. A thin frame wrapped in a pale jacket far too big for his body. A knit cap low over his head, though the night was warm. An oxygen tube traced softly across his cheek. A woman sat beside him, his mother. Though Dean didn't know it, yet one hand gripping his fingers as if she were afraid that if she let go, he might drift away. The boy wasn't looking. At the stage the way most children did, he wasn't bouncing. He wasn't pointing. He wasn't distracted. He was watching Dean the way someone watches a sunset they know they might never see again. Something inside Dean tightened. He missed a word no one else noticed, but he did. His voice carried on, but his eyes stayed there. The boy smiled. Not a big smile. A tired one. A grateful one. A smile that looked like effort. Dean finished the song. The applause roared. People rose to their feet. The orchestra swelled, but Dean didn't move. He stood at the microphone, hands resting lightly against the stand, eyes still locked on that small figure near the front. For a moment, no one understood. The band waited, the crowd waited, the applause slowly softened into confusion. Dean lifted one hand. Not in. Thanks, and pause. The orchestra fell silent. The arena followed. 20,000–5,000 people went. Quiet. A living breath held in a single chest. Dean leaned slightly toward the microphone. His voice, when he spoke, wasn't the performer's voice. It was the man's. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said gently. "Give me a moment," whispers rippled through the seats. Camera operators shifted. Stage managers froze. Dean stepped forward, closer to the edge of the stage, scanning until he found him again. "There's a young man down here," he said softly, pointing, All eyes followed his gesture. Spotlights adjusted. The boy was suddenly visible to everyone. The small body. The tubing. The woman gripping his hand. The crowd stilled. Dean's voice lowered. "What's your name, son?" The boy hesitated, then lifted the microphone. The usher hurried to him. "Ethan," he said, barely louder than breath. Dean smiled. "That's a strong name." The boy's lips curved. "How old are you, Ethan?" 12. A murmur moved through the audience. Dean swallowed once. "And who brought you here tonight?" "My mom." The woman lifted her free hand, tears already shining on her cheeks. Dean nodded at her, then looked back at the boy. "You like music, Ethan?" The boy nodded. "I like your music." Laughter rippled gently through the stadium. Dean smiled wider, but something in his eyes softened. "What's your favorite song?" the boy thought. Then, the one about "When You're Not Alone?" Dean's breath caught. He knew exactly which one he meant. A song about late nights and empty rooms, about voices on the radio when there's no one else to talk to, about finding company and melody. Dean straightened. Then he did something no one expected. He turned away from the microphone. He raised his hand again. And he stopped the concert. Not a dramatic stop, a human one. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, turning back, "we're going to do something a little different tonight." Band exchanged glances. The stage manager stared from the wings. The audience leaned forward. Dean stepped to the very edge of the stage. "Ethan," he said gently, "I'm going to sing that song. But not from up here." Took a step down. Gasps rippled. Another step. Security moved instinctively, then stopped when he lifted a hand. Dean walked slowly toward the boy. No spotlight. Followed him. He didn't ask for one. The crowd parted as he moved down the aisle. People stood, not to cheer, but to make space. Phones lowered. Voices hushed. What filled the arena now wasn't excitement. It was reverence. Dean reached the front row. He knelt at eye level for a moment. Neither spoke. Then Dean held out his hand. Ethan placed his small fingers into it. Dean turned slightly, so the microphone would carry. "This song," he said softly, "was written for nights when people feel scared, or tired, or alone. But tonight, Ethan, I'm singing it with you." The orchestra, uncertain, softly found the opening chord. Dean didn't stand. He stayed kneeling. The music began quiet, bare. Dean's voice rose. Closer than anyone had ever heard it in a stadium. Not projected. Not polished. Personal. The words floated over the audience like a shared secret. When he reached the chorus, he didn't look at the crowd. He looked at Ethan. "You're not alone," he sang. Softly the boy's grip tightened. The woman beside him covered her mouth. Around them, people were crying openly. Men who had come for nostalgia. Teenagers who had come for curiosity. Elderly couples who had danced to these songs 50 years earlier. They weren't listening to a concert anymore. They were witnessing a moment. Dean's voice trembled on the second verse. Not from weakness, from meaning. He sang about the dark being less frightening when someone sits beside you, about the world being lighter when someone knows your name. About how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay. Ethan closed his eyes, and for the first time that night, he leaned back, not against his chair, against Dean. Dean didn't stop singing. He adjusted, gently, instinctively, wrapping one arm around the boy's thin shoulders as if he had done this 1,000 times before. The song finished. No orchestra swell, no dramatic ending, just the last note fading into the open night. Silence followed. Then one sound, a sob. Then another dot, then thousands. Dean didn't stand. He didn't speak. He stayed there, one arm around a 12-year-old boy, while 25,000 people cried. And in that silence, something began. Something no one in that arena yet understood. Something that would follow Dean. Martin for the rest of his life. Something that would outlive the music. Something that would turn one interrupted concert into a story the world would never forget. The applause never came. Not at first. What filled the arena after the final? No, it wasn't cheering, it was something heavier. Something quieter. The kind of silence that doesn't mean emptiness, but fullness. As if 25,000 people were afraid that any sound might shatter what had just been created. Dean Martin still knelt on the concrete floor between the rows. His arm was around Ethan, the boy's. Breathing was shallow, soft, almost rhythmic, like the tide touching the shore. His eyes remained closed, but his face was peaceful in a way it hadn't been before. Not smiling, not strained, resting. Dean felt it before he understood it. A shift, a weight that seemed to ease. He leaned back just enough to look at him. Ethan, he whispered. The boy opened his eyes slowly. They met, and in that look, something passed between them that didn't need language. Gratitude, relief, and something fragile hope behind them. The woman's shoulders shook as she cried silently into her hands. Around them, people pressed fingers to mouths, wiped cheeks, clutched strangers. Some were praying. Some were simply breathing. Dean helped Ethan sit back fully. Then he did. Something no performer had ever done at one of his concerts. He stayed. He didn't return to the stage. He sat in the empty seat beside the boy. The orchestra waited. The stage lights glowed without him. Minutes passed. No one moved. Finally, Dean spoke into the microphone, still in his hand. Folks, he said gently, the show can wait. A murmur swept the arena. Dean turned to Ethan's mother. What's your name? He asked softly. Lily, she replied, barely audible. How long have you been here tonight? She swallowed. Since early afternoon. He wanted to make sure we didn't miss anything. Dean nodded slowly. Does he feel all right? Lily hesitated, and in that hesitation, the entire night changed. She looked down at her son, then back up at Dean. Then she said, the words she had not planned to say out loud. He isn't supposed to be here this long. Dean felt it hit him like cold water. What do you mean? She took a breath that trembled. Ethan has a condition, she said. A rare one. His heart and his lungs. They don't work the way they should. The doctors told us last month that... Her voice broke. She pressed her fingers to her lips, then forced herself to continue. They told us to start saying our goodbyes. The arena did not react. It absorbed. Dean did not speak. He did not blink. He simply looked at Ethan. The boy, for his part, was not afraid. He was watching Dean with a seriousness that didn't belong to a 12-year-old. They said I might not get another birthday, Ethan added quietly. Dean's jaw tightened. What made you want to come tonight? He asked. Ethan looked past him, up at the glowing stage. At the instruments waiting in silence. My dad used to play your records, he said. Before he got sick. Before he stopped. Before he passed? Dean finished gently. Ethan nodded. He used to say your voice sounded like someone who knew how to stay calm when things were falling apart. Dean closed his eyes for one brief second when he was in the hospital. Ethan continued. He told me that if I ever felt scared, I should listen to you. Because your songs always made him believe there was still something good coming. The air felt heavy. And tonight, Dean asked. Ethan looked back at him. I wanted to hear it before. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Dean stood slowly, not like a performer returning to his mark, like a man standing from a prayer. He turned toward the stage. The band was watching him. Uncertain, the crowd waited. Dean lifted the microphone, ladies and gentlemen, he said, and his voice no longer carried charm or humor or polish. It carried truth. I need you to understand something. Tonight isn't a concert anymore. Every word fell into the crowd like a drop into water. It's a moment, he continued, and moments are more important than music. He looked back at Ethan, then at the thousands of faces. There are times in life, Dean said, when a song isn't something you hear, it's something you give. He raised one hand to the orchestra. Pack up. The musicians froze. The audience gasped. Dean nodded once. That's not a request. Slowly, one by one, the instruments went quiet. The grand stage built for spectacle began to empty, but no one left. No one even shifted, because something else was happening now. Dean walked back to Ethan. He knelt. Again, then he spoke softly, not into the microphone, but to the boy. Do you have anywhere to be after this? He asked. Ethan shook his head. Then, neither do I. Dean stood and faced the crowd. I'm canceling the rest of the concert? A wave of shock rolled through the arena. Not because I don't want to sing, he said, but because tonight there's somewhere else I'm needed. He turned to Lily. Would it be all right, he asked gently, if I spent some time with your son? Her eyes widened. You don't have to, I know, he said, but I want to. She covered her mouth, nodded, and then without another word, Dean Martin reached down and lifted Ethan carefully into his arms. The crowd rose as one, not cheering, witnessing. He carried the boy up the aisle, not toward the stage, toward the exit. People stepped back, forming a silent corridor, hands pressed to hearts, heads bowed. Somewhere, someone whispered, God bless you. Didn't look at them. He only looked at Ethan, and then the doors closed behind them. The arena stood frozen. 25,000 people in total silence. No music, no announcement, no ending, just Anne, understanding that what they had come to see had just transformed into something none of them had expected. Backstag, the hallway smelled of cables, dust, and coffee. The noise of the crowd was distant now. Like surf beyond a wall, Dean laid Ethan gently onto a couch. A medic rushed forward, but Dean lifted a hand. Just check him, he said quietly. Don't make this feel like a hospital. The medic nodded. Vitas, gentle adjustments. Dean stood beside Lily. When was the last time he left the hospital? He asked. 2 weeks ago, she replied. They said he should stay close. Rest. No crowds. Dean nodded slowly, and yet he came. He wanted tonight more than anything.
Ow.
Dean looked down at Ethan. Then tonight, he said softly, isn't over. He turned to his assistant who had just arrived. Pale and shaken. Clear my schedule. You still have Chicago tomorrow? I don't anymore. He looked back at Ethan. Find us a quiet place. Somewhere warm. Somewhere safe. His assistant hesitated. For how long? Dean didn't answer immediately. He watched the boy breathe. Then he said, as long as he needs. Elsewhere, the CROWD back in the arena. People still hadn't left. Some were crying openly. Some were holding strangers. Some were calling family members. News cameras were already setting up outside. Whispers moved like electricity. Did you hear what she said? He's dying. He carried him out. He ended the concert. A reporter murmured into a microphone, something extraordinary just happened here tonight. No one yet knew what it meant, but everyone felt it. A story had begun, not about music, about time, about choosing where you spend it, and about a man who had stepped off a stage to step into someone else's life. Backstage, LA Tier Ethan, slept Dean sat nearby. Not speaking, not moving, just being there. At some point, Ethan stirred, opened his eyes. Did I do something wrong? He whispered. Dean smiled gently. No, he said. You reminded me what's right. Ethan studied him. Are you? Are you famous? Dean chuckled softly. Sometimes, Ethan thought. Then he said, my dad would have liked you. Dean's throat tightened. I wish I'd met him. Ethan closed his eyes again. You kind of did, he murmured. Through me, And in that moment, Dean Martin understood something that would change him forever. This was no longer about a night or a concert or a dying boy. This was about a promise, one he hadn't spoken but had already begun to keep. And what Dean did next, what he chose to give this child, what secret from his own past he would reveal, and the decision he would make that shocked doctors, media, and his own family, would turn a single, interrupted concerto, a chain of events that no one in that room will ever forget. Asterisk. The city outside the window glowed like a distant galaxy, lights from hotels. Diners and late-night streets shimmered across the glass. But inside the quiet room, the world had narrowed to the slow rise and fall of a 12-year-old boy's chest. Ethan slept. Machines whispered softly. Not loud, not alarming, just present. A reminder that time was no longer something to assume, it was something to listen. 2. Dean Martin sat in the chair beside the bed. Not as a star, not as a singer, as a man keeping watch. He had been there for hours. The doctors had come and gone, gentle, respectful, honest in the way that only people who walk with endings every day know how to be. They had confirmed what Lily already knew. Ethan's heart was failing, not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly, like a candle reaching the end of its wick. No emergency surgery, no miracle procedure, just comfort, just care, just time. Dean had thanked them. Then he had stayed. Lily slept on the couch in the corner, curled around her purse, exhaustion finally claiming her. Dean had draped his jacket over her shoulders earlier. She hadn't woken. Ethan stirred. His eyelids fluttered, then opened. He looked confused for a moment. Then he saw Dean, and his face softened. "You're still here," whispered. Dean leaned forward. "I told you," he said gently. "I don't go back on promises." Ethan studied him in the low light. The boy looked younger than 12, smaller, fragile in a way that wasn't just physical. "Are you missing your show?" he asked. Dean smiled faintly. "No," he said. "I found something better." Ethan's mouth curved, then faded. "My mom's scared," he said quietly. Dean glanced toward. "Lily, I know." Ethan swallowed. "I am too." The words hung between them. Dean stood and moved closer. He sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb any lines. "Can I tell you something, Ethan?" he asked. The boy nodded. "When I was young," Dean said, "I thought brave meant loud, strong, untouchable. But I've learned. Brave is just staying when you're afraid." Ethan's eyes stayed on his. "Then you're brave," the boy said. Dean exhaled. "Some days," he admitted. Ethan hesitated. "Did you ever lose someone?" Dean's fingers tightened slowly around the edge of the mattress. "Yes," he said. The room waited. "I had a son," Dean continued. "A long time ago." Ethan didn't speak. "He was little," Dean said. "Smaller than you. He had my laugh, my stubbornness. He used to sit on my chest and drum on my ribs like they were bongos." Ethan smiled faintly. "I was on the road a lot," Dean went on. "I told myself I was doing it for him, for his future. But one winter, he got sick." Dean's voice thinned. "I wasn't there when it started, or when it got worse, or when he asked for me." Ethan's fingers curled into the sheet. "I got the call in a hotel room," Dean said. "By the time I flew back, he was already gone." Silence settled, not heavy, sacred. Dean looked down. "I learned then," he said quietly, "that sometimes loving someone means choosing the room instead of the stage." Ethan didn't cry. He reached out, his hand found Dean's. "I'm glad you chose this room," he said. Dean closed his eyes. The promise formed in him then. Not spoken, not dramatic, but absolute. He would not leave this boy alone, not in fear, not in waiting, not in the quiet. The DECICO on morning came slowly. gray. Light filtered through the curtains. Doctors returned, charts were reviewed, voices were low. Dean stood with Lily near the door. "What happens now?" she asked. The doctor hesitated. "Honestly," he said, "we focus on comfort. On making him feel safe. We'll monitor him here today, but—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Lily nodded. Her hands shook. Dean felt something rise in him. A refusal, not of reality, but of emptiness. "What does he want?" Dean asked. The doctor looked surprised. "Excuse me? What does Ethan want to do?" Dean repeated. The doctor glanced at Lily. She blinked. "No one's asked him that," she whispered. Dean nodded once. "Then I will." He went to the bed. Ethan was awake, watching the light. "Good morning, young man," Dean said softly. Ethan smiled faintly. "Did I miss anything?" "Only the sunrise," Dean replied. "We can still catch it tomorrow," Ethan thought. Then he asked, "Am I dying?" The room stilled. Dean didn't look away. "Yes," he said gently. Ethan absorbed this. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he asked, "How long?" "We don't know," Dean said, "but we know this." "You're here now?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Can I tell you something weird?" Dean smiled. "Weird is welcome." "I don't want to just lie here," Ethan said. "I want to do something." Dean leaned closer. "What kind of something?" Ethan's eyes brightened slightly. "I want to see the ocean. I've never seen it in real life. And I want to eat one of those huge breakfasts they have in movies. And I want to hear you sing again. But not on a stage, just like you did last night." Dean felt his chest tighten. Then he said, "That's exactly what we're going to do." Lily looked up sharply. "What?" Dean turned to her. "If the doctors say we can move him safely," he said, "I'm taking him." Her eyes widened. "Where?" "Anywhere he wants." The doctor stepped forward. "Mr. Martin, his condition means time is short," Dean finished. "Which is exactly why it matters." The doctor studied him. Then, slowly, he nodded. "With medical transport," he said carefully. "With oxygen." "With supervision," Dean nodded. "Whatever he needs." Lily's breath hitched. "You don't know us," she said. Dean met her eyes. "I know enough." The world finds OUT by noon. Word had spread. A concert canceled. A boy carried out a hospital visit by evening. Cameras waited outside the building. Headlines. Formed Dean Martin walks away from sold-out tour. Concert that never finished. Singer. Spends night with terminally ill child. Agents called. Producers. Panicked. Lawyers warned. Dean ignored them. He signed papers. Arranged. Transport cleared his calendar. One by one, cities vanished from his schedule. No explanation, no apology, only one message released through his assistant: "The music will wait. A child will not." The first Joe you are and why the next morning, they left before sunrise. An ambulance. Discreet, a private car behind it. No sirens, no spectacle, just motion. Ethan lay on a padded stretcher. Oxygen in place, eyes wide as the city passed. Dean sat beside him. "Where are we going first?" Ethan asked. Dean smiled. "East," he said. "Toward something big enough to remind us how small fear really is." Ethan's lips curved. "The ocean." Dean nodded. They drove for hours. Fields replaced buildings. Sky replaced noise. At some point, Ethan slept. Dean watched. When Ethan woke, the air had changed. It smelled different. Open. Alive. They reached a cliffside. Road. The ambulance stopped. Doctors checked vitals. Dean lifted Ethan carefully into a wheelchair. He pushed him forward. And then, the horizon opened, blue beyond blue, waves rolling endlessly, wind lifting the edges of blankets. Ethan stared. For a long time, said nothing. Then tears slid silently down his cheeks. "It's moving," he whispered. Dean knelt beside him. "So are we." he said. They stayed there listening, breathing being, and as the sun lowered toward the water, Dean began to sing. No microphone, no orchestra, just a voice carried by wind. Ethan leaned back, eyes closed, and for the first time since anyone could remember, the machines were not the loudest thing in the room. The ticking Sialosa that night. In a quiet seaside house arranged by friends, Dean hadn't even known he had. Ethan's condition worsened. His breathing grew shallow. Doctors intervened. Oxygen increased. Monitors murmured urgently. Lily cried. Dean stood at the foot of the bed, fists clenched, helpless in the way only love can make a person helpless. Ethan opened his eyes. Found Dean. Did we do the breakfast thing? He whispered. Dean forced a smile. Tomorrow, he said. I promise. Ethan nodded faintly. Then, can you stay here tonight? Dean stepped forward. He took the boy's hand. I'm not going anywhere. Ethan's fingers tightened weakly. Good, he said. Because I think I'm scared again. Dean leaned closer, so only he could hear. Then I'll be brave enough for both of us. And as the machines whispered around them, as the ocean moved outside the walls, as the world watched from a distance, Dean Martin understood something with perfect clarity. This journey was not about saving a life. It was about honoring one, and the hardest part had not even begun. The ocean was restless that morning, not violent, not calm. Alive. Waves rolled in slow, endless rhythms, breaking against the distant rocks like a giant breathing in its sleep. Pale light spread across the sky, turning clouds the color of pearl and fire. The world was waking inside the quiet seaside house. Ethan was not asleep. He was watching the window. Dean noticed it the moment he entered the room. The machines were still there. The soft hum, the gentle blinking lights. But something had changed. Ethan's eyes were open, clear, focused, and far too peaceful for a boy whose body was losing a battle. Dean stepped closer. Good morning, sailor, he said softly. Ethan smiled. You hear it? He whispered. The ocean. Dean asked. Ethan nodded faintly. It sounds like it doesn't end. Dean pulled the chair close and sat beside him. Lily was asleep in the corner. Worn down by nights of hope and fear tangled together, Dean hadn't slept. Not really. He had dozed, woken, watched, listened to every change in breath. Ethan turned his head slightly. Did I miss the sun? He asked. Dean glanced toward the window. Not yet, he said. It waited. Khan's fingers twitched against the sheet. Can you open it more? Dean rose and gently pulled the curtain wider. Light spilled into the room. The ocean revealed itself in full, blue, endless. Moving, Ethan inhaled slowly. A small sound escaped him, not pain, wonder. It's bigger than I thought, he murmured. Dean swallowed. Some things are, he said. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, Am I going to die today? Dean closed his eyes once. Then he answered, I don't know, he said honestly. But I know this. You're not going to be alone. Ethan nodded. I'm not scared like before, he whispered. It's softer now. Dean leaned closer. What made it softer? Ethan looked at him. You stayed. The word struck deeper than any applause Dean had ever received. Ethan breathed slowly. Then he said, Can I ask you something important? Anything. But I'm not here anymore, Ethan said carefully. Will you remember me when you sing? Dean didn't hesitate. I will hear you in every note, he said. Ethan's lips curved. Then I'll still be there. Dean reached for his hand, held it. Ethan's grip was weak, but it was there. The breakfast that never Siamese doctors arrived quietly. They didn't rush. They didn't pretend. Their faces said what? Their mouths tried not to. Time had narrowed. They checked the monitors, adjusted the oxygen, spoke in hushed tones. Dean stood near the bed. What happens now? Lily whispered. The doctor met her eyes gently. We stay comfortable, he said, and we stay present. Lily's breath broke. She rushed to Ethan's side. My sweet boy, she whispered, brushing his hair. I'm here. Ethan smiled at her. I know, Mom. He turned his head toward Dean again. We didn't get the big breakfast, he said faintly. Dean smiled sadly. How about? We imagine it? Ethan's eyes brightened just a little. Okay? He whispered. I'd have pancakes. And those tiny sausages. And the juice that's really cold. Dean nodded. And I'd steal one of your pancakes when you weren't looking. Ethan almost laughed. Almost. Then he grew serious. Dean. Yes. Can you sing again? Dean felt the room shift. The doctor stilled. Lily pressed her hand. Over her mouth, Dean leaned closer. What would you like to hear? Ethan's eyes drifted toward the window. The one you sang for me first, he whispered. The one that says, I'm not alone. Dean nodded. He stood, but he didn't walk away. He moved to the window. Opened. The sound of the ocean rushed in. Wind stirred the curtains. Light filled the space. Dean turned back, and then he sang. Not loud, not for performance, for presence. His voice was thinner than on any stage. It cracked. It softened. It carried every year he had lived, every mistake, every love, every loss. He sang about not being alone in the dark, about voices that stay, about hands that don't let go. Ethan watched him, not like a fan, like a child, listening to a story he wants to take somewhere else. Halfway through the song, Ethan's eyes closed, but his hand did not loosen. Dean kept singing. The machines continued. The ocean answered. Tears ran silently down Lily's face. The doctors looked away. When the last note faded, no one spoke. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then Ethan exhaled, a long breath, a peaceful one, and he did not take another. The monitor sound changed, soft, continuous, final. Lily gasped. Double quotes, no dash, no dash, no, she whispered. Gripping him, the doctor stepped forward, checked, then slowly. He lowered his head. Time stopped. Dean stood very still, his mouth still slightly open from the last word he had sung. He looked at Ethan's face. The tension was gone. The effort, the fear. The boy who had watched the ocean was now as calm as it. Dean reached out, placed 2 fingers lightly at Ethan's wrist. Nothing. He closed his eyes and bowed his head. What happened? FDR, they did not rush him away. They did not hurry the moment. The doctors left them alone. The ocean kept moving. Lily held her son and cried. Without sound, Dean remained by the window. For a long time, he did not move. When he finally turned, walked back to the bed, he knelt. He placed his hand gently over Ethan's heart, and he said the words no microphone had ever heard. Thank you for choosing me. Lily looked up at him, her face broken, grateful, unmeasurably empty. He loved you, she whispered. Dean shook his head. I loved him, the world, RESPONDS. The news spread quietly at first, then everywhere, not through headlines, through hearts. A concert that became a vigil. A singer who walked away from a stage to sit beside a child, a boy who saw the ocean for the first time. Song sung at the edge of life. People lit candles, shared stories, wrote letters. Schools spoke Ethan's name. Hospitals played Dean's music in pediatric wards. Parents held their children tighter. Concert tickets were returned, not in anger, in respect. Dean canceled the rest of the tour, publicly, permanently. He released one statement, just one sentence. Some stages are bigger than crowds. The lasting ECHO months later, Dean returned to the ocean alone. He stood where Ethan's wheelchair had been. The wind was gentle, the waves endless. Dean reached into his coat, removed something small, a hospital bracelet. He knelt, placed it between two stones, let the tide reach it. He did not speak. He sang one verse quiet, then he stopped and listened, not for applause, for something else. And in the rhythm of the water, in the endless breath of the sea, Dean Martin finally understood. He had spent his life giving people songs, but that night, a boy had given him something greater, a reminder that the greatest performance is presence, that the most powerful voice is compassion, and that sometimes the moment the music stops is when it finally becomes eternal.